I saw someone recently say something very provocative about the power of consciousness. And it wasn't about the power of memory, because I can't remember who it was. But he compared the state of research and application today of the power of consciousness to where we might have stood with the power of electricity about 110 years ago. Okay? And I say this because now that notion would seem insane, that the two things might be similar, but think about it. About 110 years ago, we knew there was power in lightning and in static electricity. But believe it or not, it was mostly reserved for parlor tricks, carnivals. It was kind of a trick, kind of some wild thing. And yet, we harnessed it, and the world is as we now know it. But what if we could learn over the next 100 years, and maybe hopefully a little quicker, learn to tap and harness the power of consciousness? What might the world look like then? A couple of years ago, there was a phenomenon around the film What the Bleep Do We Know? And then in this past year, an equally huge phenomenon around the book The Secret. Both of them have at least part of their foundation in this notion of tapping the power of consciousness, the power of thought, the power of emotion, the power of intention. And today, my guest will be LYNNE McTAGGART, who I have chosen because, having been provoked by that comparison to electricity, I wanted someone who takes a scientific view of these things. LYNNE McTAGGART is a journalist and author. She publishes with her husband, Brian Hubbard. They have a public company called What Doctors Don't Tell You, which publishes newsletters and books about alternative health. And continuing to write about alternative health and editing What Doctors Don't Tell You publication, she has developed a program called Living the Field, based on the scientific concept of the zero-point field. And she's also heading something called the Intention Experiment, a large-scale web-based investigation to discover if intentions can affect the physical world. She's the author of The Field and of The Intention Experiment, her new book, Using Your Thoughts to Change Your Life and the World. Welcome, LYNNE McTAGGART.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, I like people to get a feel for the people behind the ideas and the work that we deal with in the show. And you were a pretty conventional journalist at some point 10, 15, 20 years ago, doing books about the Kennedys and that sort of thing. What led you to the work that you're doing today?
A happy detour. I got ill, and that led me to that discovery and that journey to get better. And the heady experience of getting well and finding different alternatives really led me to write about What Doctors Don't Tell You. And I run that newsletter, I still do, and in the course of doing that, I study a lot of medical evidence. I'm a real foot-on-the-ground skeptic in a lot of ways. I'm not very woo-woo. I mean, I'm very, feet on the ground. I always like to say I'm sort of an Armani girl. And I'm in the course of studying all this research, I kept coming across studies of things like spiritual healing and homeopathy and acupuncture. Really good studies showing this stuff works. Really good scientific studies. So I kept thinking to myself, particularly in the case of spiritual healing, now wait a minute. If we can send our thoughts to someone else and get that someone else to get better, then our understanding of the world must be incredibly incomplete. So this prompted me to go on a journey and really convince my publisher to let me go on a journey more or less without a compass. I didn't know what I was going to find. And I began talking, as journalists do, I began scavenging for information, and I started talking to frontier scientists because I felt they would know. And what I was astounded to discover is that each of them had the tiniest piece of a puzzle that added up into a new science, and that the old science really was crumbling before my eyes. And then I realized that because they're scientists, it's hard for them to communicate in anything other than math. And also, they don't like to put the whole piece together. They like to just stay with their own experimental data. So I soon realized that if I was going to present a picture of this, I was going to have to synthesize this myself. Okay. And so that really became the field. But I was left with just some sort of questions and evidence and suggestion that consciousness can affect matter. That was really the leftover business from the field that I wanted to explore. And so that's really what the intention experiment is all about. It's not only a book that looks at the science of intention, but also the science of how to do intention. And finally, it's an ongoing experiment.
Okay. And although we will certainly deal with the intention experiment, your ongoing web-based examination of these phenomena, I think for listeners, I want to establish the ground first that might lead them to be interested in that. I was moved, as I said in my intro, to interview you because at least it appears to me that you take a scientific approach to issues and phenomena that are often believed with little regard for science or dismissed with little investigation of the science. Is that a fair appraisal?
Absolutely, and I have no patience with either, to be honest. I like to have evidence. When I look at medicine, I look at what works and what doesn't in conventional and alternative medicine and look at the evidence. And there's lots of evidence to suggest both work in some cases and both don't work in lots of other cases. So it was that kind of skepticism that led me to really investigate this, but also open-mindedness. I mean, I like to approach things open-mindedly and say, okay, is there evidence for this? And there certainly is loads of evidence for how intention works and how consciousness could affect matter. And it's all wrapped up in the new physics and some of the discoveries that are really out there on the very edge of the frontier.
Okay, let me give you first a caution that I hold, which is that, and I'll ask you about that first, and then I'm going to ask you to give us a brief survey of the science, okay, so that we can establish that. But let me just say that, is it a leap of faith to jump from some of the findings at the level of quantum physics to believing that those same things act at the level of human interaction or at the level of physical movement and that sort of thing? So just kind of put that at the top, and then, with that in mind, give me a brief outline of the science.
That's a great question, Terry, and I'll try to summarize it. No, it's not too much of a leap, and here's why. First of all, the science that we have been living by and that forms really our paradigm of the world is basically Newtonian science, and that's a science that is many hundreds of years old. And it basically describes a very well-behaved world where individual things are thought to be individual, separate, and finally assembled as they are, not influenceable, and moving according to strict laws in time and space. That's the well-behaved world we're used to thinking of our world as. Now, quantum physicists and other physicists are now discovering that that's not really accurate, that at the very tiniest level of our being, we exist completely in relationship, not as separate, and that we're all part of one giant energy field, the zero-point field, and that we're all vibrating packets of energy, exchanging energy with this giant field. But what's been very interesting, too, is to find that many of the so-called Alice in Wonderland properties of quantum physics occur in the world at large, occur among the building blocks, atoms and molecules, for instance, of the sticks and stones world we live in.
So, Newtonian world emerges a few hundred years ago. It works, it's tested, it continues to work, and basically it becomes, at least among many, the predominant worldview. Quantum physics, relativity, that sort of thing, occurs 90, 80, 70 years ago. And yet it seems to me beyond the world of esoteric physics doesn't seem to come into our regular, practical, day-to-day world much. That is what you're saying is changing, and what you're going to cite now is specific experiments where the only explanation, perhaps, is when we apply the realm of quantum physics.
Absolutely. Well, there have been experiments, and these aren't really far-out things. These are at august universities like University of Chicago, where they've done tests finding that atoms have a property that, as well as subatomic particles, display non-local properties. That means they have an instant interaction, an instant effect on each other, regardless of time or space. And that instantaneous influence means a connection. It's almost like twins being separated at birth, and one being in L.A. and the other one being in New York, but constantly affecting each other, so that even if they never see each other again, they both like the color blue, and they both marry a person with the same first name, and if one falls down, the other one falls down at the exact same moment and breaks her leg too. So it's that kind of instantaneous connection over any kind of time or space.
So this notion that at the quantum level there's a relationship between particles, that has been around for a few years. What you're saying is, if listeners weren't aware of that, explain that notion of the non-local relationship at the particle level, and then what you're saying is mind-blowing, is that at a reputable university like the University of Chicago, they found that this doesn't just apply at the particle level, but at the level of atoms.
Absolutely. So that means the building blocks of the big Newtonian world also display these weird quantum properties. And that we're finding that at other places, too. Other institutions are finding non-locality between, stars in the galaxy, in our bodies, through all kinds of systems like that, leading people to say this is a basic inherent property of life, this kind of instant connection without, and the reason it's so exciting is that up until now, we've always thought that one thing influences another by doing something physical to it.
The billiard balls, right?
Yeah. You got to kick something. You got to give something a good swift kick, or freeze it, burn it, drop it, that sort of thing, in order to affect it. And now we're seeing you don't. You can have an instantaneous connection without regard to time or space.
Okay, this is pretty exciting. Now, another thing that you talk about is the importance of the observer effect. Right?
Yes.
Heisenberg, etc. We've got this observer effect. First of all, briefly, just explain that, and then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about it.
Okay. Well, first of all, once again, the Newtonian view is that things are separate and finally assembled. They're finished as they are. What they find in the quantum level is that subatomic particles aren't a set anything. They are a superposition. That means they're a potential of all possible states, all at the same time. Think of a chair in an auditorium. To describe a quantum particle, you'd have to describe every chair in the auditorium as being part of it at the same moment. So that superposition state, the not quite something real state, I call it unset jello, we always also thought that was just in the quantum world, and that a subatomic particle would start behaving itself when it became something larger, part of an atom or a molecule. They are now finding at Vienna, the University of Vienna, and other places, that big molecules made up of like 100 atoms, also display this potential, all possible selves, unset jello state. So once again, this is so exciting because it demonstrates that reality probably out there, the big world we know of, isn't perhaps all final and finished.
And separate.
Separate, and maybe is influenceable. Now, the observer effect, they noticed this in quantum physics. It's been well known that this not quite something real state becomes real when an observer, a scientist, takes a measure, or just observes this. It collapses it into one single state. And once again, this has caused many scientists to believe that the world that we are somehow co-creating, and that we are intrinsic to making reality out there real.
Okay, the question that has always occurred to me since I first came across the observer effect is, it sounds like that it seems to be necessary for reality as we think of it to sort of solidify and take a particular form, that someone has to observe it. And yet, human beings are a pretty recent addition to the universe. Animals, any observers, it seems, are a pretty recent addition when you look at the relative age of the universe. Does that mean that there was no reality till human consciousness showed up, or till some sort of consciousness showed up? How does this work?
Okay, well, we have to stop thinking of consciousness as something that's locked inside our brains, and that is particular to humans. I mean, I happen to believe that animals are far more conscious because they live the field much better than we do. They're much more psychic, et cetera, et cetera. And consciousness is an ethereal something that we tap into. Other evidence demonstrates that it's certainly not locked up in our brain. Think of near-death experiences. Think of the new evidence of coma victims. all of whom have an awareness. They have consciousness, even though the brain is registered as having no activity. So consciousness is an out there other, and that we are a part of. I shouldn't say other, because we're all part of one thing, but it's not inside our brains, so it's not unique to humans. And I'm not sure that it isn't available also to plants. Plants are demonstrating a kind of primary perception too.
But if you will, plants themselves are quite recent in the relative age of the universe. So
Sure.
It's this bigger question, which if there isn't an answer that's easily stated, in the few minutes that we've got here, fine. But that these things are sort of, as you said, this sort of jello-like squiggling version of reality until an observer observes them, and then they sort of solidify and seem to be in one place at one time, and so on. What was observing them before, or did reality not exist?
Well, I think consciousness was observing it. And as I say, I want to get beyond the idea that consciousness is unique to humans or is something just with us. That consciousness, in the beginning, there was probably the field. There was consciousness. And that perhaps has had some effect. I mean, I don't pretend to have all the answers, and I would be silly to try to speculate and say, this is how it was in the beginning. I have no idea. What I do know, though, and all I like to look at, is what evidence we're uncovering now and what implications they have for us now. And certainly the implications of all of this are that reality is somehow influenceable. And when you combine that with a lot of the other evidence we have now that intention is a physical, tangible energy we can measure, and that we are beaming out information all the time in terms of tiny, tiny currents of light that we're beaming and we're also receiving from our environment, you see this paradigm of an intelligent universe that is receiving and sending information all the time, in all of the individual aspects of it, are doing so at every moment.
So in other words, what you're saying is that's another thing which science, hard observation, has revealed once people chose to look for it.
Yes, exactly. That we are all beaming out tiny currents of photons. We know this now not only in machinery that can count these photons, but we also know it through imaging, very sophisticated CCD cameras. We've actually captured the light coming off of living things. We captured the conversation that goes on between living things, that they're constantly sending out messages and information, and it's also being replied to with the same quantum information, and that we are affecting things at every moment. Even healers, we've been able to capture light streaming out of the dominant hands of healers.
And for this kind of information, the observations, the research that's been done, as you say, at credible and reputable universities, that there's a lot of it in the field and there's a lot of it in the intention experiment.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think I have 50 pages of notes and bibliography in the intention experiment. It's hopefully there to satisfy I attempt to write in a readable fashion for the ordinary layperson, but it's there for a comfort factor because we in the West want proof. We don't want just woo-woo stuff. We want proof, and we want to see that this really is not just somebody's opinion, but that it's actual fact.
Okay, and that, as I said, the reason that I chose to interview Lynn rather than some of the other people that are out there is because I do feel that as a journalistic author, you have gone out. And what I notice also is when you said, at credible universities like this one or that one, my guess is that you may find, as I looked at who you chose, you may find 3 or 4 experiments, but if you've got one that's at a Harvard or a Chicago or one of the really strong places, you'll choose those because, again, we seem to like that sort of credentializing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I steered away from anything on the edge, even things that sounded very interesting that I thought might be proven later in both the field and the intention experiment, because I wanted people to understand, and I only wanted prestigious places where people had been carrying out a lot of evidence. Now, some of them aren't consciousness researchers and might be horrified to realize where this is ending up. Because they didn't set out to show that, intention works. They were just playing around with atoms or molecules. And then, wow, it's just, in reading about it, I thought, wow, that implication is incredible.
Yeah. So let me tell people that I'm speaking with LYNNE McTAGGART, author of The Field and the Attention Experiment, and she takes, as I say, a scientific view of the power of consciousness, the power of intention. Tell us what the Attention Experiment is and how people could get involved.
The Intention Experiment is a series of online studies that I've invited the readers to be a participant in. It means that you all are part of the experiment. We have a target in one of many labs around the world. Lately, we've been using with the University of Arizona. And periodically, I ask my readers to come on our website, look at a picture of the target that's sitting there at the University of Arizona, and try to affect it according to the very specific intention I put up there. Now, lately, we've played around with affecting the light emissions of a leaf, and we've demonstrated huge significant effects. Using thousands of people around the globe and from 30 countries, we've been able to show that we have a profound effect on the light emissions of a living thing. Then we've moved on to seeds, where we actually, to see if we can get them to germinate faster and grow faster than others. We've done 3 such studies, and we've found, once again, hugely significant, statistically significant results. In all of these studies, we've got a control or a series of controls. So they're done by real scientists in real scientific settings. But it's been very exciting because it means that we are all part of the greatest global laboratory in history.
Okay, so let me lay this out for people and tell me if I've got it right. You go to the website, theintentionexperiment.com, and you then, you get involved, you sign up, whatever you do, and you read the protocols and so on. Then what you do is you look at a target, which you can see on screen, then try to push this intention out toward that target.
Exactly.
So people randomly around the world who happen to go to the website and decide to do this are doing it, and then you're testing to see whether there is a difference in the ones that had intention applied to them versus the ones that did not.
Exactly. And now we've started from the ground floor, of course, with very simple targets, because this has never been done before on the web like this. But we're moving up the scale. It's always philanthropic targets. We are setting up an ecosphere, a little mini world, and we're going to be raising the temperature and then see if we can get everybody around the world to lower the temperature. I'm working with Deepak Chopra and his Alliance for New Humanity, and we're working with a hot spot in Latin America where the violence level has been measured. We're going to try to lower violence there. We're going to try purifying water. We're working with lots of different targets and lots of different labs. So we're not reliant on just one lab.
Okay, so as you can hear, if you go back to the start of the show when I said, 110 years ago, electricity was a freaky thing that showed up in carnivals and parlor games, and within a few years it began to change our world. The question is, are there experiments that are ongoing now, and LYNNE McTaggart's intention experiments are some of them, that might find that we can harness our consciousness, our intention, in ways to make that a power that we also can harness and use, and then what do we do with that for good or ill? The books are The Field and The Intention Experiment. The sites are livingthefield.com and theintentionexperiment.com. Thank you, LYNNE McTAGGART, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. It's been fun to be with you.
And now with a few reflections on these ideas, Teresa O'Neill.
The power of positive thinking. If that means I can change the world without ever leaving my Barcalounger, I'm all for it. When I was a teenager, talking to houseplants was all the rage. They were supposed to respond to this positive attention and grow. I talked to my fern daily. It was green and lacy and ethereal looking. I'd tell it was beautiful and I would promise to mist it every day, and still my cat ate it. So LYNNE McTAGGART believes thought can change the world. But isn't harnessing the power of thought in today's ADD society like herding kittens? It's one thing for me to concentrate on thinner thighs in 30 days, but for thousands of people to concentrate simultaneously on my thighs seems a little hopeful, not to mention a little creepy. It would be great if we could all concentrate on world peace and achieve it. But if I had to count on thousands of people to put down their lattes and turn off their Blackberries to save my life, would it happen? With my luck, I'd be hit by a bus when everybody's watching the Dancing with the Stars finale, and I'd be dead without a thought by the first mambo. If we do have this miraculous healing power, would we ever get anything done? Do the dishes. Nope, there's trouble in Pakistan. Sleep at night? Not while the ice caps are melting. Soon people would be hoarding their good thoughts. There would be banks. Bank robbers would escape with good intentions and brotherhood towards men. But there's a problem here. During the course of the day, bad thoughts come more easily to me than good thoughts. When somebody steals my shopping cart, I don't have to search for George Carlin's 7 forbidden words. They jump directly to mind. But good thoughts are a little harder to come by. I only connect with my inner Doris Day when I find a really close parking spot at the mall, or when my plane is experiencing extreme turbulence and I promise an unseen entity that if allowed to live, I'll save a lot of orphans I haven't met yet. Wait, I've got an idea. Use the bad thoughts to change the world. Take that road rage, that LA road rage, and channel it. If my thoughts have power and energy, why waste them cursing somebody who thinks I'm a moron anyway? I can channel that 30 seconds of energy into repairing the levees in New Orleans. Instead of flipping off that tailgater, why not think about stopping the war? With all the hours I sit in gridlock, I could probably single-handedly save the whales. So, take advantage of what comes naturally. Use your rage, but charitably. And if it works, we can all think LYNNE McTAGGART a nice thank you note.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.